you mentioned Justin Fields. So Justin Fields to me, I think is just so interesting from a fantasy standpoint. We touched earlier in the last block about, rushing quarterbacks, but for me as a guy not getting the same sort of respect as Trey Lance. Like Trey Lance, we haven't really seen him yet. Of course, he's got better weapons in the offense, maybe a better play caller, but he's getting drafted as like people are comfortable leaving their draft as him being the quarterback one on their team in a standard 12-team format. The same can't be said for Justin Fields. Tyler, if you have it, yeah, look at this. Quarterback 17, ADP 127. I mean, he averaged 56 rushing yards per game over his last 5. He had at least 35 rushing yards per game in 4, 5, 6 of his final 7 games. And I know you remember the first game where they rolled him out against Cleveland. And this is why I feel like there's reason to be just excited and optimism for this, just a change in guard. You remember when they played Cleveland and they rolled him out as quarterback with like no motion, no design runs? Like Nagy could not play to this guy's strength at all. And then we started to see the upside and what he could do with his legs. Are you in on Fields? You think he's a strong quarterback too? Meaney obviously is going to be a guy that gets a lot of targets. Cole Kmet had no touchdowns last year. One of 2 players, 60 grabs and no touchdowns. You got to feel like there's going to be some touchdowns in his future as well. Potential breakout season. I know a lot of people are in on him. Just talk to me for a minute about this Bears squad. You also had Velus Jones. And I want to throw Brian Pringle at you because he's a guy that I think is worth his shot too. I took him in the Scott Fish Bowl as wide receiver 82. I'm like, all right, why not?
Yeah, so I want to preface this by saying I'm like the eternal pessimist when it comes to being a Bears fan. I'm not somebody that just blindly hypes up Bears players. It's not my MO at all. I'm fading David Montgomery at his cost this year. I'm not crazy about Darnell Mooney at his cost, but Justin Fields is one of my favorite guys to draft. And maybe I'm being a little bit blinded by homerism, but I think that I'm pretty objective when it comes to my analysis. And what I see is Justin Fields has so much potential. I mean, his upside is through the roof. And you already talked about Trey Lance a little bit. I think that juxtaposition next to Trey Lance is why Justin Fields is such a value this year. Last year, Jalen Hurts was getting drafted in the same exact spot that Trey Lance is this year. And fantasy managers have become pretty savvy to looking at these year 2 quarterbacks with rushing upside. They take big steps forward. We saw it with Jalen Hurts last year. We saw it with Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, where these guys step up and they can use their rushing upside and their big arms to put up big fantasy numbers. And I think that the reason Justin Fields is a discount is because of Trey Lance, because he objectively has a better scheme that he's playing in. He's got better weapons that he's playing with. But again, back to what I said last year, how is Justin Fields' situation any worse than what Jalen Hurts had last year when he had his breakout season? Jalen Hurts didn't have a lot of great weapons around him. He had a new head coach that a lot of people were kind of concerned about and still went out and smashed. And I think that we can see that with Justin Fields as well. You already talked about it, how as the season progressed, he started to look a little bit better. He had 10 total games last year where he played 65% or more of the team snaps. In those first 6 games, he was terrible. But if you recall, he wasn't supposed to start early in the season. He was going to benefit from sitting on the bench and developing behind Andy Dalton. He got pushed out midway through week 2 when Andy Dalton hurt his ankle, and he was terrible for those first few weeks. But if you look at the final 4 games that he started and finished with at least 65% of the snaps, he averaged 64 rushing yards per game, which over a full season would be over 800 yards, which is fantastic production on the ground. His completion percentage went up. He averaged 244 passing yards per game. And it's a small sample size, but if you take those 4 games and extrapolate them over a 17-game season, it would have been good enough to be the QB5 last year. So we're looking at a sky-high ceiling for Justin Fields. And I think the only reason he's a discount is because the fantasy community has become so enamored with Trey Lance.
Man, this is exactly what we said with Jake Seeley on his show All in Football. We talked about this like it's just Lance, but you just gave some amazing numbers. And down the stretch, like 25 points, 18 points, a dead game against Baltimore, whatever. 18 points after that, 19 or 16 fantasy points. He did get hurt. He left. Yeah, he only had 11 attempts in that game. So, I mean, yeah, the rushing floor is there. And you just gave the numbers. Our free prop shop over at ftnbets.com. BetMGM has him at 499 rushing yards as his season-long prop. Slam the over. FanDuel has 525, DK has 525, PointsBet has 575. So there's a wide range there. That's why the prop shop's so cool. Save yourself a little bit of time. But the 499 at BetMGM at minus 115, you may not get that for long because you just averaged
420 in half a season last year.
Exactly.